Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Sunday. We're going to get caught up today on day 7 of testimony. That way tomorrow, we're all caught up and ready for a new week. If you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications. Tap that little bell icon. It'll let you know whenever I post new content. Music fact of the day. The album She's So Unusual by Cyndi Lauper, such a great album. She was the first woman in history of the Billboard Top 100 to have 4 singles from one album in the top 5 back in 1984. Those songs, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, Time After Time, She Bop, and All Through the Night. Money Changes Everything, another great song on that album. One fact I learned over the weekend, it's very interesting. Miss Hutchins actually went to college here in the upstate of South Carolina. She went to the University of South Carolina upstate. I saw that after Joel testified to that on Friday, and I looked it up. She did some work for our local PBS station and met her husband here. He's from Greenville. I believe his family still lives here. So just thought that was very interesting. On the last episode, I did not get into Sarah's testimony. She was the last witness on day 6. She didn't complete her testimony. That carried over into day 7. So we're going to pick up really at the end of day 6 and go into day 7 with all of her testimony. She doesn't work in the entertainment industry anymore. After Rust, that kind of did it for her. Prior to that, she had worked on 5 or 6 other productions. Seth Kinney was the vendor for firearms on Rust and also on another production she worked on before that. She'd only known Seth for a couple of months. On another film, they couldn't find an armorer, so they put her in charge. Granted, y'all, this is a girl who, bless her heart, has never fired a gun. Seth was recommended to her as someone to teach her how to be an armorer. On that film, they had a revolver. She wasn't even sure if it was a single action revolver or not. There were only 2 or 3 days on that set that they used blanks or dummies. She got the props job on Rust through Seth. He sent her information into the line producer. He told her that he had an armorer in mind for Rust, which was Hannah. Now, on the set of Rust, they were supposed to have an armor assistant. Production had only allowed 5 days, and they had more gun scenes than that, so they recommended that she get help. She had brief training with Hannah. She said it was literally a few minutes. She said it was different on Rust, how you would load and unload the revolver due to the different type of gun. You would have to pull the hammer back and the trigger at the same time and then slowly release both to lock that back in place. As far as the accidental discharge, they were going in for another take and she had to unload the blanks that were already discharged and reload those. As she was locking the gun back into place, her thumb slipped off the hammer and it went off. Hannah was in the bathroom when it happened. Hannah didn't know if Sarah would be working with the guns anymore after that. There was a little disagreement between the two of them, but they moved on. She messaged the people who needed to know, Seth Kinney, Brian Norvell, who was the production designer, and Roe Walters. She wasn't aware she was Hannah's boss on set. And she said the gun belts were sourced by Hannah from a different movie set, and they came with dummy rounds in them. At most, they put a couple in those, and she didn't see Hannah shake each round for the ones that were already in there. If you remember, Baldwin's belt was custom made, and that came through Seth. She was contacted on September 23rd to work on Rust. Filming began October 6th. She would get guns from the vendor to the set from the PDQ warehouse, and Seth provided some of those blanks. Both Seth and Billy Ray provided a few boxes of dummies, and the 45 long Colt rounds were not originally on set. Hannah asked for them one weekend. They weren't working, so Sarah picked those up in Albuquerque on October 12th. This was the only box of 45 long Colt dummies that Seth provided. Sarah thought they had plenty of dummies, but Hannah thought the ones they had didn't fit quite right. She never heard anyone request the guns have dummies put in them, but they dummied them up a handful of times. Sarah would help if there were more than 2 guns on set just to help speed things up. She says essentially Hannah was under her for props, and then she was under Hannah for the guns. Hannah may have shook dummies, but Sarah just doesn't remember seeing her do that. Now, in the last episode, we saw some footage of Baldwin coming out of that door and then running up on that hill. And this is when he was rushing the crew. Hannah reaches down in that fanny pack and you can tell she's really rushed. and just hands somebody a bunch of rounds and doesn't shake them. You see that clearly in that video. Sarah never loaded the Baldwin gun. There was some kind of a division of labor agreement, and Hannah was working closely with Baldwin. So when he requested the guns, he would call for Hannah. She would take photos with her cell phone for continuity. That's just to be sure that props look exactly the same in each take, that they're not moved, because, you can find all the movie mistakes online if you want. And so things like that, they just take photos to make sure when there is a new take, everything's the way it looked. They admit a photo into evidence from October 10th of Hannah holding the revolver. 2 days before this photo was when Sarah brought the 45 long Colt dummies from Seth to the set. They also show Baldwin's gun belt that's full of dummy rounds from October 13th. When she got it, it had no rounds in it. She doesn't know if it was her or Hannah who loaded the belt with the dummy rounds. October 21st, the day of the shooting. She walks through the camera crew leaving. It was a slow-moving day before lunch. Sarah was coordinating with the art director for props later that day, but she said overall they just actively were not working. Hannah wasn't busy either. In one scene before lunch, the actors had their guns holstered. She doesn't remember if the guns had dummies in them or not, but they took those back to the truck before lunch. And after lunch, Sarah, Hannah, and Nicole got the guns from the safe and then took those to the church. Sarah forgot a gun in the safe and had to go back to get it. She said the prop cart was about 200 yards or more from the church, and they put the guns on the prop cart. Sarah loaded Jensen Ackles' gun with dummies and realized she had forgotten Swin's gun from the cart. She said the dummies were in a cup on that cart. Sarah said when she was going back to the truck, Hannah said she was going to check Baldwin's gun with Dave Hall's, and then Nicole stayed with the cart. When she got back, she loaded Swin's gun with dummies. Sarah went to Dave for the safety check and then gave those to the actors. Hannah put the dummies in Baldwin's gun, but Sarah didn't see her do it, and she doesn't know where Hannah got those dummy rounds from. She doesn't see Hannah again until after the incident. So Sarah and Nicole were at the prop cart. She didn't know at this point where Hannah was, and then she hears the gunshot and hears Joel's scream. She knew it sounded different than what she was used to hearing on set. She asked whose gun went off, and they said Baldwin's. She walked over to Jensen, and he was looking inside the church. She also looked in. She could see Joel on the ground clutching his shoulder. Jensen told her to get the guns back to safety to get him away from the set. She took his and Swin's gun to the prop cart and put the little socks on the gun. She took the dummy rounds out because they weren't in use, and she said she threw those away because she was in a state of shock and panic and thinks it was just a reactive decision. She calls Seth at some point, and he was freaking out. She didn't know at the time that Miss Hutchins was hurt. She told Seth that Joel had been shot, and she said that call only lasted about 30 seconds to a minute. She knows blanks and dummies don't cause people to fall down and scream. When she talked to Hannah, Hannah was in the middle of a breakdown and showed Sarah the rounds in her hand. And Hannah told Sarah, "I swore I shook them." Sarah could see one did not have the bullet anymore. Dave was not there at that point, but she did see him with Hannah and Baldwin's gun at the cart. Sarah started rattling dummies and noticed that some didn't rattle like they were supposed to. At this point, Nicole's next to her and sees all of this. She told Hannah some of the rounds didn't rattle. Sarah told law enforcement this later at base camp. Sarah forgot some of the rounds had holes in them, which means they wouldn't rattle. She saw 2 or 3 rounds with those silver primers. When Sarah was walking the gun back to the truck, she got a text or a call from Brian Norrell asking her to bring Hannah's personal bag to her. She did, and Nicole and Daniel, the art director, took the guns to the truck. Sarah personally didn't take anything else to the truck, and the prosecution asked if she brought any live rounds to the set, and she said no. When she brought the box from Seth, she didn't see Hannah check those rounds, the prosecution asked, and she said Seth never asked her to plant evidence or destroy evidence. She went back to the town area of the set. If you look at this overhead here I have on YouTube, you can see that the church is a little bit isolated from that town set. People were telling others to leave the area. Sarah said at this point she was having a panic attack and Jensen was comforting her. They were talking about what happened or what might have happened. Sarah doesn't remember Hannah ever communicating that she felt like she couldn't do her armor duties effectively because of props. She remembers there being talk of doing training with that child actor. Hannah wanted to train him off set with the permission of his guardians. We know production told her no. But she was going to do it with the guardian's permission, but Sarah doesn't know if it ever actually happened. On cross, Sarah agreed to cooperate with the state, and if she testifies truthfully, she won't be prosecuted. She has complete immunity. Before she reported to set, she had the prior film experience with armor duties, and she met for training with Seth within a 10-day period of finding out she had the job to when she reported to set. She felt proficient with what she was working with as far as the guns and the ammo. The defense asked if she remembers the scene with Baldwin running up the hill with the child actor. He fires a shot after they yelled cut. You can see Sarah on camera running up towards Baldwin. She said she would get the weapons from the actors whenever Hannah needed her to. On paper, she's an employee of Seth and PDQ Warehouse. She was working under his license. She threw away the rounds from the other two revolvers, but it was in the time frame when she talked to Seth after the shooting. The defense asked what she remembered about the call with Seth, and he was mortified that this had happened. She didn't tell anyone she threw the rounds away, but she said, I was also in a public place. They weren't the rounds in question, so she didn't think it mattered. The defense said that wasn't your determination to make. They asked if Seth directed her to do that, and she says no. She thinks they took back 9 guns to the prop cart, and they were Seth's. The defense asked where Hannah's personal bag was, and it was on the prop cart. Hannah was with Brian in a little house on the set after the shooting. He was just trying to comfort her. He brings up that on direct, she said she threw the rounds away in a state of shock, but she previously had said she threw away dummy rounds even though they were reusable. The defense points out this belongs to production and that they paid for them. She doesn't remember if she told law enforcement she threw the rounds away or not, but Nicole was standing there when she did. Hannah showed her the rounds that came out of the revolver. Hannah hands Sarah the spent casings, and Sarah took it to the prop cart. She doesn't know what happened to those other rounds, but she did check the rounds on the box on that cart. She originally testified she thought half of those could have been live ammunition, but she testified on direct. She didn't think that was correct, but did determine some of those were. The defense asked if she's had very little contact with Alec Baldwin on the set. She didn't have a lot of contact. She didn't have his number. And the defense asked after the shooting, when did you get his phone number? Because she texted him after the shooting. She said his personal assistant had called her, so she called him back, and they texted a couple of times. She made a statement that on October 31st of 2021, Baldwin called her, and she told Seth that she was making sure she's keeping her facts straight. She had 3 calls with Baldwin after the shooting. She said they were theorizing because they just didn't know what happened. He would ask questions she didn't have answers to. She made a statement on October 23rd that she talked to him and that he's having a hard time recalling things, but he thinks Dave was the one that handed him the gun. On the day of the search warrant for the prop truck, she came after they started. Seth was there as well. She wanted to get some personal things, and at that point, others were allowed back on set to get things, but up to then, that prop truck had been locked. They talk about the discharge, and she said her and Hannah had a small disagreement after. He asked if after that she talked to others about wanting to fire Hannah. And she said no, they had disagreements, but she never wanted to fire her. The defense brings up an interview Sarah did on November 2nd of last year, where she said she wanted to fire her. She agrees she wanted to fire her from props. Other people wanted to fire Hannah as well. Seth wanted her to do something about it, but she felt Hannah wasn't doing enough with props ultimately. She did not tell Hannah she wanted to fire her. She told her what she needed to do with props, and she said Hannah didn't want to do it. She talked to Jensen, Swin, and Nicole in the town right after the shooting, and then at base camp after the shooting. She didn't leave until around 9 or 9:30, and they asked what she was doing, and she was like, I was waiting around to be interviewed by police. He brings up that she did not tell law enforcement about throwing those rounds away, but she did a month later. She didn't take anything else from the cart the day of the shooting. He asked if she said on October 29th of 2021 in a text to Weston Brownlee that she hopes Hannah goes to jail and this is outrageous. The defense asked if her impression was that Seth didn't want her talking to anyone about anything. She said that wasn't her impression. He asked if she remembers texting with Seth when she was communicating with Baldwin. He sent an emoji with the hand covering the mouth. She doesn't remember that, but she said a hand over the mouth doesn't mean keep your mouth shut. Well, me either. I always use the zipper. On redirect, the prosecution brings up if she doesn't testify truthfully, she could be prosecuted, and she acknowledges that. Sarah explains about being Hannah's supervisor only regarding props. Hannah was over the armor department. The prosecution asked if, as her supervisor in props, did Hannah call you a word? We'll just say it rhymes with the word runt. And yes, she said, other than that, Hannah's work ethic just wasn't the best. And she wasn't always willing to help. One day, Hannah just showed up late and said she had a migraine. After the shooting, she checked on Hannah in the back of the law enforcement car to see if Hannah was okay. And Hannah said this may ruin her career. She also said this on body cam, if you remember. The prosecution asked what time and if there's a life flight on the ground waiting for Miss Hutchins when Hannah said this. She said, no, this was said in front of the church. When she said this, there was chaos everywhere. People were screaming, trying to figure out what happened. The main context of her conversation with Baldwin was how did a live round end up on set? When she mentioned she was trying to keep her facts straight, she just meant it was due to her being in a state of shock, and just the chaos of everything that was happening in the moment. The prosecution asked if she has any law enforcement experience and if she knows what law enforcement looks for at a crime scene, and she says no. The next witness is Joel Souza. He and Baldwin wanted to work together in the past, and they had a prior project that never worked out. But Joel told Baldwin he wanted to do a Western, so Baldwin hired him to write the script. He talks about how financing may fall apart, but you just keep going until you secure it. New Mexico has a robust tax incentive for filming there. Also, the landscape works for filming a Western. So once financing was secured, they started their pre-production on the project. He asked how Miss Hutchins became involved, and he says when he sees the work of a cinematographer that he admires, he makes a note of it, and he happened to see a trailer for a movie that she did. He was very impressed and looked into some of her other work, so he added her name to a list that he's kept over the years. He knew she was named as one of the top 10 cinematographers to watch for, and he said that's a really big deal when you're named in something like that. When the time came for Rust, he had a producer reach out to agents to start talking to people to see who's available and who's not. He said it came down to her and a few other women, but ultimately he was super impressed with Miss Hutchins, and they had the same vision for what this movie should be. He said that she has a backstory you don't forget, being born in Ukraine. She grew up on a naval submarine base in the Arctic Circle. He says Miss Hutchins spent time at the University of South Carolina, and that's where her and Matt, her husband, met. Joel talked to Hannah on the phone before he met her, and he had heard of her dad, Thel. And he said, in the business, who hasn't? He met her at the show and tell. That's where the actors look at all the guns spread out. They kind of figure out which gun's going to work best for each actor. He mentions the shootout scene they did, and it went really well. He said at the end of a filming day like that, he likes to thank everyone. So he texted Hannah and said if he texted her, it was because he just couldn't find her on set. He thanked her for a good job that day. He hasn't worked with weapons on set very much and didn't even know what a dummy round was until all of this happened. He doesn't remember seeing her load the dummies into the guns. He does remember her calling out which rounds were in the gun. He didn't see her shake any rounds. And he also said on set, what the armorer says is what goes. They talk about the lever rifle and if it needed to have dummies in it. He said no. There's one scene where the rifle goes off accidentally, killing someone, and the minor actor would be holding it. So they wouldn't have put any in, and they were just going to CGI the gun blast in there. He said also, you really wouldn't need to put a dummy in the rifle because it wouldn't be seen anyway in a close-up. The day of the shooting, he got there before sunrise. The camera crew, as we know, was quitting, and Miss Hutchins and the production team knew they were going to have to try to find another local camera crew. He's never had a crew walk off any other production that he's done. He knows there were some disputes between production and the camera crew, but they don't usually involve him in things like that. So he really didn't know much at that point. He did know they had their concerns, and he said he shook their hands and hopes they had no hard feelings towards him and hope they worked together again because he said they were really good at what they did. The replacements came. He said it was 3 or 4 people, and he knew they'd be down a camera that day. That slows you down. You usually have 2 cameras to catch 2 things at once, and now you have to film that scene twice. He told Dave Halls and Miss Hutchins that they weren't going to get it all in that day, but they weren't going to shortchange the scene. They would just figure out later what to do. But for that day, they would do what they could and do it well. They were able to begin filming around 9 that morning. He said they had several cast members and animals on set, and the actors were riding horses. The shot was wide. They wouldn't have needed dummy rounds in those guns. None of them. After that scene, we know they moved to the church. And due to the shots being close, some dummies would have to be put in the guns. They shot a scene where Baldwin's grandson, the child actor, brings Baldwin's character into the church because he's wounded. The kid helps him to the pew and runs out to get help. At that point, the lawmen are coming in and they filmed that and a good portion of those scenes leading up to what they would shoot when the incident occurred. When they called for lunch, Joel, Miss Hutchins, and Baldwin talked about what was coming up after lunch because they were picking right back up where they had left off. After lunch, he said they were outside too. They were filming Baldwin in the pew. Is he dead? Is he not? It's a tense scene. You're filming him and then the lawman back and forth. The first shot was one where the audience would see for the first time that Rust isn't dead and he's not super injured. Then the next thing would be the close-up of that gun coming out of the holster. They talked about that scene, and it's not a rehearsal. It's called auditioning the shot. They work with different camera angles, lighting, and the camera was on the dolly, and they're moving it in between pews. And he said the space was really tight with that equipment in there. Joel ultimately felt he was in the way, so he walked outside to a monitor they had set up so he could watch. And he saw they were setting up in a way that just wasn't going to work. And so before they got set up, he wanted to let him know what he thought. So he went back inside. He didn't see Hannah come in or out of the church. And he said, there's a lot of stuff going on. You've got different departments doing their jobs. And he knows Hannah was supposed to give Baldwin the gun, but he didn't witness it himself. He says, I'm not the tallest guy in the world, and he didn't see the gun in the holster. At that point, he got behind Miss Hutchins to look at a small monitor that's on the side of the camera. Then there is what he describes as an incredibly loud bang. And at the same time, it felt like someone took a baseball bat to his shoulder. He remembers stumbling back and yelling. And he fell to his knees and he saw Miss Hutchins being helped to the ground. At first, he thought maybe she was startled, but then he saw the blood on her back. Then it got very chaotic. He remembers them laying her down next to him, but he said they were facing in opposite directions and he just couldn't figure out what happened. He kind of thought maybe something was stuck in the barrel. He remembers Ross, who is the dolly grip, grabbing him, and then Matt came in and the two of them were tending to him. They were trying to find out where he had been shot. He remembers looking up and seeing Hannah, and she looked upset, and she kept saying, I'm sorry, Joel. And somebody just screamed at her and ushered her out. He said it felt like 5 minutes that he was laying there. It was longer because you see him later on being wheeled out on that stretcher when EMS is there. He remembers looking at Miss Hutchins and her looking back at him. And he said she had the biggest brown eyes he'd ever seen. He said they told him they were taking him to the hospital. He wanted them to take him where she was going, but they said they couldn't, but would later. When he got to the hospital, he still didn't know he had been shot with a live round. They kept talking about a bullet, but it just didn't compute for him. He kept saying, no, this is a movie set. It's not possible. There was a live round. So ultimately, they show him the x-ray, and you could see that large bullet in his back. On cross, they asked if he's aware. The responsibility falls on the assistant director if the armorer isn't on set. He said his assumption was the armorer should be on set. He doesn't remember Hannah giving Baldwin the gun, but he remembers Dave Halls announcing there was a cold gun before lunch. The defense mentions the shootout scene on day 3, and Joel just confirms what he said on direct, that Hannah did very well that day. On redirect, they just reiterate there was no scene with that rifle that had been filmed or was going to be filmed where it would have required a dummy round. The next witness is Emery Chacon. He works at the front desk at the Santa Fe Inn. That's where Hannah stayed during filming, and he got to know her a little bit. He went into her room and saw boxes of ammunition. A few rounds were not in boxes. He remembers seeing some shotgun shells, rifle ammo, and a pistol round sitting on the counter. They bring up that he went to a movie, texted her, and the defense asked if he wanted a different type of relationship with her, and he said quite possibly, but he wasn't sure how it would have worked out. Ultimately, she quit texting him. The defense reiterates he can't tell real from fake ammunition. The next witness is Wyatt Mortenson. He's a Wrangler and a stuntman who was on set. He was there most every day. He's worked on a couple of dozen films prior to this. Pretty much every movie he's worked on had guns. There was nothing directly he saw Hannah do that was concerning. He did mention there was a rifle that was lost on set one day, and he saw guns and ammo being left unattended on the prop cart most days that they were on set, sometimes up to an hour, sometimes more, and that was unusual. He noticed she didn't always take weapons from the actors after scenes, and on other films, the armorer handed it over just before the scene started filming and then took it back directly after. He explains to check the gun on other sets he's been on. The armorer checks to make sure the gun is clean, how many rounds are inside, and they do that by opening the cylinder and taking the cylinder out, because the blanks have a lot of debris that can come out with the gunpowder. Then you check the barrel to make sure nothing is lodged in there because if it is, that can shoot out with the gunpowder. When Hannah would look at the cylinder, it would be closed and not open. On Cross, she asked if he could see light through the barrel just by pulling back the hammer. He says, "Not that I know of." Then she points out, "You're not an armorer. No, you're a wrangler. And on Rust, your responsibility were the animals." And he says yes. She asked about how far away from the prop cart he was and not being able to say for sure if that was a real or a replica gun. She also asked if there was an issue with him getting paid for his work. And he said at the very beginning. The next witness is Cherilyn Schafer. She was the on-set medic. She's an EMT, and she also has a civil lawsuit. She noticed Hannah did not secure the weapons as an armorer normally would, and she didn't take the guns from the actors after takes. Sometimes setting up the next shot can take 20 to 30 minutes, and the actor would still have their gun that whole time. When actors would do their own safety checks, she says sometimes Hannah would be near, sometimes not. She would put the ammo into her fanny pack by tipping the box and then would use her fingers to dislodge them from that foam tray. And then she would hand the box back to Sarah. She saw her mixing rounds into that fanny pack, and Hannah didn't check the rounds as she put them in there. The morning of the shooting, the witness went to set. She had her trauma bag. She has a box and a stand that has just typical things you might need, like sunscreen, cough drops, bug spray. She said Halls called a safety meeting that morning, mainly to get people kind of back together since the camera crew was packing up and just to touch base about the plan for the morning. After lunch, when she heard the gun go off, she asked whoever was near if they were filming because she hadn't heard that they were on that radio. She grabbed her bag and ran to the church. She wasn't far away. She heard emergency and medic come on the radio. She said her training is to wait and make sure the scene is safe before going in. Somebody told her Miss Hutchins had been shot, and then she saw Joel obviously in pain. Baldwin was at the back of the church. She looked at Miss Hutchins, and their camera operator, Reed, was asking Miss Hutchins if she could feel her legs. At first, she said yes, and then she said no. So the witness knew there was a likelihood there was a spinal injury. She got closer to Miss Hutchins and could see blood dripping from her back onto the floor. So she called out on the radio for someone to dial 911. She asked somebody to call one of the electricians on set because he had combat medic experience. That person took over with Joel. She cut Miss Hutchins' jacket and then put gauze on the gunshot wound that she first saw on the back. She knew since there was only one gunshot, that shot had went through and through, and she would need to find the entrance. She asked someone to hold pressure on the entrance wound with a gauze and got a mask to put on her for oxygen. She did not intubate her, by the way. She radioed that they needed 2 ambulances and the life flight. She said they're about 15 to 18 minutes away from the hospital, and she knew with the bleeding Miss Hutchins had, she would need to be sent to Albuquerque where they would be better equipped with their trauma center. Miss Hutchins was fighting them with the mask. She told someone to clear the church of anyone that didn't need to be in there, including Baldwin. It took 12 to 15 minutes for EMS to get there. On Cross, about Hannah putting the ammo in her bag, they point out the witness can't tell visually what's live and what's not. She did see Hannah bring Sarah the boxes, but she doesn't know if Sarah shook the rounds or not. They ask if she's ever worked on props or as a part-time armorer. The answer was no. She's asked if she knew the fanny pack had multiple compartments, and she just said she saw Hannah pouring them in. The defense brings up she's suing David Halls, PDQ Warehouse, Sarah, Seth Kinney, and Hannah. They say the lawsuit says she's been traumatized by the incident and she's seeking monetary damages for extreme emotional distress. She's obtained a civil judgment against Sarah and a sum of money that has been entered into judgment. Her case against Hannah is still pending. They ask if her testimony today is going to help her civil suit. She said she's not here for her civil case. She said if Hannah and Dave Halls had done their jobs, a woman wouldn't be dead, a mother wouldn't be gone. They say you filed a civil suit over this, and they point out she worked in an ER for almost 3 years. She said she doesn't have experience treating gunshot wounds, but she's trained for it. On redirect, she says she brought the lawsuit to make changes in the industry so that this never happens again. And the reason she claimed extreme trauma is because that night she went home and looked at her son, who is the same age as Miss Hutchins' son, and said she couldn't save his mom and how her spouse lost the love of his life. And the prosecution's asked to have that stricken from the record. The next witness is Mamie Elizabeth Mitchell. She is a script supervisor. She feeds lines to the actors. She'll look at the length of the movie versus the script. So sometimes they'll cut scenes or add scenes. She also works on continuity. She said, for example, if you're leaning on your left hand in a take, she'll make sure you're leaning on your left hand in the next take. She's worked on set with armors before at least over 20 times. Compared to other armorers, she found Hannah to be inexperienced and unprofessional. She saw guns on the cart without Hannah anywhere around. She said armorers are methodical and very focused. She said Hannah's cart reminded her of that drawer in your kitchen you throw everything into. She was present for the accidental discharges. She said they were frightening. Usually they know when a gun's going to be discharged, so they protect their hearing. They admit a video in, and you see the shoulder belt on Baldwin's side with the primers visible. In the church, she looked at her phone as Baldwin was on the pew to be sure he looked the same in this shot. And she took a photo. And right when she was doing that, that's when the gun went off. She heard moaning, and the director was crawling backwards. Miss Hutchins was falling in her direction. She ran to get help and also to get away from danger. She ran towards one of the trucks with her phone and called 911. She has filed a civil suit as well. On Cross, they say the guns you saw in the cart, were they real or replicas? She said to her knowledge, the guns on set were real. They asked, did you report the accidental discharge? And she said, well, I didn't because everybody heard it. That was it for day 7. Joel came across as just such a big sweetheart. And you think about everything he'll have to deal with emotionally from this day, the survivor guilt or just the trauma of what happened to him and just the what ifs. I mean, the woman he was standing directly behind was killed. And that's a lot to have to deal with. And just everybody in the church, all the living victims that will have to deal with this for the rest of their life. It's going to be interesting to see how the rest of this trial plays out and deliberations. I don't think this is going to be a quick one. I think we could be here a few days. We'll see you tomorrow with a recap of day 8's testimony.